make you feel kind. We're gonna have a good time. Let's get the meaning down. We're gonna spread being nice around. You just go right ahead because it's here and it's now. Just move every bone to a cosmic powwow. Cosmic powwow. Cosmic powwow.
Hello and welcome to Toward Equality of Life. Thank you all the people out there in Greater Boston and Cambridge for tuning in this evening. This is the show that has been asking you the fundamental question, what are you living for? And does it even matter to be asking such a question? The reason we talk about toward equality of life is because, frankly, it's just not that good and getting worse. We've examined some of the situations that bear this out in previous sessions. But you yourself can tell that stress is increasing, general availability of kinds of styles of living and doing things that are easy, nice, and fun together are less and less. Violence seems to be more. And we take it for granted that these kinds of circumstances have to exist, increasingly pulling ourselves in and defending ourselves against contingencies that are not in our best interest. On this show, we ask you to think, really think, and to give up any predisposed, conditioned, commercial kinds of ideas you have about what life is and what you're getting up every day for, or frankly being conditioned to get up every day and proceed in a very automatic way without thinking, and yet contend with all the increasing not so nice contingencies affecting your life and commonly all of our lives together. The sad part of this is that we know what makes health. We know what makes adjustment. Very much. We know that if you have people who care for you, that if you have a comfort zone that you can feel safe and secure in, that if you have guidance and nurturance as you're growing, that if you have a sense of community, that if you relate with people, we know these things bring greater health and adjustment. We know so many things that are for certain ways that would pull out increasing benefit to us all, and it's almost completely wrong to not take advantage of how we understand the human condition and what makes it better and what makes it worse. Now also we know that there's more and more depression even among children. Think about that. Why should we be having clinics where we are treating children, young children, for depression? And of course adults constantly being diagnosed as depressed for any number of reasons, including reasons that are not only psychologically environmental but physically environmental. We don't even know some of the subtle effects on chemicals that we might be ingesting prescriptively, and also toxins and other kinds of elements that we're not aware are having an impact on us. We should think, why is this so? And frankly, looking around, for example, we know recently, as I'm speaking tonight, there is a mass suicide being reported in the media. Of course, that in and of itself is a very deleterious thing as an undercurrent to our mental health to be seeing that. But we might also ask, for example, does our media have to pick it apart day by day and drag it through our mental spaces for us to have a constant diet of it? We work too hard as well. We are a nation that is worked to death, and people would have the retirement age get older in order to receive Social Security instead of younger. Compared to other industrialized nations, we work much more. Now those nations are trying to put pressure on their people to work harder as well and to have less vacation. But we are under stress, And also, we are a nation that is on drugs. We are on drugs legally and illegally. We are extraordinarily on drugs. And many commercials are constantly showing us how to be on drugs, including showing us how to persist in behaviors that are detrimental to our health and take a drug to ameliorate it. To continue with foods, for example, that cause stomach upset, and then proceed with antacids, and to proceed with tense lifestyles, and then take aspirins or pain relievers, etc., etc., etc. Unfortunately, we're a nation that doesn't know itself and doesn't know each other. Every week I talk about things of pressing circumstance to try to convey how urgent some of these messages are, especially ones about the animals and the environment. And unfortunately, and mathematically, exponentially into the future, I have far too much fodder for what I'm trying to persuade you to understand. This week, I will just quickly run past some of the many events that show what a dire strait our environment is in. On the 19th of March in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, thousands of residents, including students and prison inmates, are beginning to trickle back after a fuel spill in the Mississippi River, the mighty Mississippi, our most big, glorious, historical river in the whole country. An official said the evacuation order is no longer in force. The leak occurred after a barge loaded with 400,000 gallons of benzene and toluene broke free of its tug and ran aground. The place was blanketed with toxic gas, and they could now, after some time, they could no longer detect airborne toxic fumes, but it was at first covered with toxic gas. Now, we talked in a previous show about the Gulf War and benzene as part of a petroleum chemical. Also toluene, which maybe I heard also one of the ingredients that hasn't been disclosed in cigarettes, but it is a solvent, a cleaning solvent, and has very deleterious effects on the mind and the body. And here people and our mighty Mississippi and the fish and the wildlife and the otters and the beavers and everything trying to live gets it right in the face. Then on the 19th, heavy rains in western Washington caused dangerous mudslides and drenched the western Washington state today. Overflowing rivers, saturated hillsides, people injured, cars buried. Then we have on the 19th, Clinton declares major disaster exists in Louisiana, which was struck by a severe ice storm on January 12th to 17th. Then we have a debate over the Everglades rock quarries. March 17th, mining companies and environmentalists at odds over plans to create a water impoundment area at the edge of the Everglades by quarrying limestone. Roughly half the rock used comes from such quarries. Miners say this series of deep pits, which they envision as a lake built, will help store more fresh water for the Everglades and South Florida. But environmentalists contend the quarries will degrade the quality of water and may speed up seepage from Everglades marshes, drying them up. There is so much trouble in the Everglades. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Its majesty is beyond being able to speak about it. It is already under such dire straits from the sugar industry, seepage, from many water dammings and floodings, contrivances for different kinds of projects that have caused it to become dry and overly fire prone in so many places. And the poor alligators, you may laugh, have lost their home, to say the least of humans that live in that area. Building more highways will destroy more wetlands and more wildlife. Where's the environmental benefit of that, says the friend of the Everglades. Then, of course, an explosion is on the 17th reported, deemed Japan's worst nuclear accident. Yes, this is not Chernobyl, this is not 3 Mile Island. Last week's explosion at a nuclear fuel reprocessing plant north of Tokyo was the nation's worst nuclear accident. quoted the agency as saying that it rated 3 on a scale of 10 by the IAEA, the international agency, showed serious irregularities, that possibly radiation which had uranium and plutonium was released into the atmosphere. The Chernobyl explosion was a 7 on a scale of 10, and the 3 Mile Island was a scale of 5. This was a scale of 3 supposedly. 30 plant workers inhaled the air contaminated with radioactivity, but an official for the state-run agency said none of the workers was harmed. Now, if you believe that, as the saying goes, I have a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn. Now, the trouble with the harm, like the time I told you about the people at a supermarket that were breathing tar all day for several days, the trouble with the harm is it's not enough to drop you dead or cause you to go to a hospital in an instant perhaps, but it's more tissue damage, it's more brain damage, along with all the others. We have a question now, and a person who has visited with us before is here today to bring us the question. Let us have the question, please. Hello.
Hello.
This is Jasmine Mojica, everybody. How are you doing today, Jasmine?
Good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Have you got anything of interest that you would like to tell the people today?
No.
Nothing really. Okay. What's on your mind when you look around at the world? Is there anything on your mind? Do you think about anything?
Well, not really.
Not really, not yet, huh? I know you like elephants. You showed me an elephant that you like, right? You really like elephants. Okay. Well, thank you for the question, and we'll be standing by. Now we have Jerry from Quincy Braintree. How safe are the nuclear reactors in Seabrook, New Hampshire, and Plymouth, Mass? Well, I am not going to make a statement as to the safety of those reactors because I am not versed in overseeing them or following what the regulatory agency says about them, though I have known the regulatory agency to be criticized for deeming the plants safe when in fact they shouldn't be. But I will say this on a personal basis. I am very happy that I do not live near Plymouth or Seabrook, and that is not a nice thing to say. And I also believe, I don't know whatever came of the data that tended to show that there were more cancers in the Plymouth area. I don't know if that ever panned out. Also, I saw something in passing about the residents of Seabrooks challenging the way the plant was operating or the fact that it was operating because of some illnesses or some environmental features they saw that seemed to be proof. The thing about these plants is they use water of the adjoining area to cool, and that water goes back, and what is the likelihood that that water itself has radiation in it? What is the likelihood that there are, of course, in any kind of energy processing situation, emissions escaping into the atmosphere? And also when the water is returned, where does it go? Does it go back into the same pool and it heats to an extraordinarily high degree? And we know we have instances of where fish float belly up and so on. And could this be because of gradient temperature changes which are so vital in the water when water is heated and cooled and so on and returned back to its source? So I could not say, but I would say this. I unequivocally would not want to have nuclear power, A, because radiation is radiation, we don't need to produce it, and it has to go somewhere, some of it has to emit, it has to use water to cool, it has to have radioactive waste which doesn't degrade. I'm told here to mention our telephone number, which is 742-3333. Please call in. It is not a way to be producing energy. Radiation is deleterious to human tissue. We do sustain a little for medical uses, and even there many books have been written by the professionals which say, please curtail your use of radiation for medical purposes and use it, if at all, only when absolutely necessary. So just think, do we need any more ways of getting radiation, and radiation in the atmosphere, and accidents that can happen, even not accidents, but radiation in the atmosphere. How does it behave? How does it cause the molecules of the atmosphere to behave when particles are emitted? The structure, the atomic structure, and the molecular patterns that develop from this are different because of the radiation, and it's just not a good idea. It's just an all-around not good idea. It's a bad idea. Finally, we have chemical vapors on the 26th. Was that yesterday? This is terrible. Forced voluntary evacuation in Baton Rouge. I think of Janis Joplin's song, Busted Flat in Baton Rouge, but this is a whole other kind of Baton Rouge now, isn't it? And thousands of workers leaving the area complaining of a noxious odor and a bad taste in their mouths. Chemicals, vapors could be residue from the cargo of chemicals that included, again, benzene and toluene. The latter and the former known to be very deleterious to human health. It said, a blue haze covers the river near Baton Rouge. Again, the Coast Guard spokesman says it causes no pollution or injury, and the barges were quickly rounded up. The point is, how can you know if it causes injury? Because people don't immediately fall dead? And even like the Gulf War syndrome, which may not be from radiation per se, look how sick people have become from toxins they had to inhale and ingest. Here we have another question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Oh dear. This is a terrible question. I mean, it's an important one, but it's a sad one. It's from Steve in the Back Bay, asking what can be done to prevent mass suicides. A lot of the things that you see around you, and even when I use a word like violence, or when someone calls in and says, what about common courtesy? These are not things we can change by just saying we wish people would be good, we would have some information that we convey, we would have people belong to support groups and so on, or we would get them into a correct religion. These are things that are much easier said than done. People's behavior doesn't change that way, and this is an important point. One of the important points of this show is that the way we can change ourselves and each other and society and the way we're living and go against the grain towards a better life is to be aware of the contingencies that are influencing our behavior on a one-to-one basis. And so to get at something like mass suicides would take a compound explanation and description of walking through those persons' lives, examining from where they came, to what kind of parents or environment around them, to what kind of temperament they had, to what kind of experiences they had growing up, and we'd have to do an examination. But generally speaking, it's not the kind of thing that can be said, there's just a way to prevent this in a direct kind of a way. It's a much broader and much more difficult question. And I'll tell you one way, too. Not that I favor censorship, I absolutely do not. But I do not favor the media picking apart this tragic circumstance and conveying it from morning, noon till night, asking anybody they can grab the sleeve of to tell them something about it so they can use it as a news story. This is not good for us. That much I do know. You can tell us it happened and leave it at that. Don't glorify it. Thank you. We have another question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I want to say please keep calling at 742-3333. This question is from Luke on Beacon Hill. Do you believe that the disease multiple chemical sensitivity exists? Certainly, we are distributed, so to speak, not literally, but in a figurative sense, all along the normal curve according to our sensitivities. Why do some children come into life with cancers? Why do some people fall prey to cancers and earlier than others? Why, for example, if people do get cancer around a nuclear power plant, do some get it sooner and worse, and so on. Because people's chemistries are unique and individual on so many numbers of variables that they're practically infinite for practical purposes. And their sensitivity to chemicals would be very different as well. And we know for a fact that people are sensitive to chemicals when we see things like asthma, which so often can be traced specifically to certain chemicals. And by chemical, I don't mean benzene and toluene in the sense, the lay sense, that if it's something bad, it's a chemical. I mean chemical that all of life is chemistry. This chair is chemistry, this skin is chemistry, this everything is made of chemical. Life is chemistry. And people's sensitivities to chemicals certainly would differ. And there have been instances, there's been a whole new upcropping over the years in medicine of allergy medicine. Physicians that are just studying what people have in their homes and what they're ingesting and so on because of their sensitivities, and they do find that when they remove carpets and the glues of carpets, or even certain things from their diet, to say the least, of actual toxic or industrial chemicals, detergents, soaps, and so on, that they can change some of the many, many different kinds of manifestations you can have to chemicals. And there are many reported cases of people who are so sensitive to anything synthetic, for example, formica, or the lacquer on this chair, or what the fibers of this carpet, or the glues, anything synthetic, that they have had to remove themselves into the woods, into homes that were built very long ago that contain absolutely nothing in them that is not natural, in order to control the reactions they have from non-natural or synthetic materials. Much more has been written and said about this. Some people even study body reactions, not only sensitivities, but body rhythms and your psychology based on materials you're wearing and synthetics or organic and inorganic materials in your environment. Did you ever notice that you could get a highly sensitive reaction to someone's perfume? I have noticed that. Some people may enjoy it, and other people may say, oh, that's disturbing, they don't want to be around it. One time I got a letter, a statement from a store, and they put perfume in there, and it was sitting on my desk, and I didn't know what the horrible smell was, and I was looking all over, and I was not liking it at all, and it was right in the envelope. It was a perfume. Now, we speak of emissions and toxins in the air and the ground and the water, and we like to mention animals on the show all the time as well. And in addition to hurting us, it's killing the animals, and I say this all the time. It's killing the birds, and we won't know what joy and little bit of respite and optimism we can get until no bird sings. When no bird sings, then we will have a sorrow and a pain in our heart that is so deep and grievous we won't be able to tolerate it. And the fish, I've been told by people working in the fishery, often are very full of cancer. People who take the innards out of fish have reported to me that very often they are taking out cancerous innards, but the flesh, of course, is not obviously cancerous. So we're losing our food chain. Submarines that are powered by radioactivity are in the water and emitting and disposing and having accidents of radioactivity. There's mercury in the water, aluminum in the water, both of which are very bad for you. There's cruise ships releasing, they're often cited for releasing their garbage into the water. There's sludge from all the oil drilling going on, and it's destroyed many an oyster and clam and shrimp bed, as you yourself know. Then back to the birds, there are the plastic rings on the six-packs and anything packed this way that get into them as they grow. They tangle up in the plastics, and then they grow larger, but the plastics don't expand, and they choke or whatever to death in an agonizing way from the plastics that are caught on their body. And then there's all the roadkill on the road that we have to watch if we drive down a highway now that spring is coming. And of course the younger people and some older people, in order to protect about how painful this is, they laugh at it. Because when you find out how cruel life is, you sometimes have to turn it around and make it meaner than mean. And so they call it roadkill and road pizza and make jokes about it. This is not good for us to be seeing this. We don't want to see squashed raccoons on the roadway. Then we have the polar bears up in Alaska who now, how long has it been? A couple of years or more, that had to wake up after the winter spill and go down to the water and take what they could from the water, which was of course polluted with oil. And what did they feel like when they ingested that oil-damaged goods? And what happened to their offspring, or did they even have them after eating that oil-filled stuff out of the sea? Or did they starve because they couldn't even get their hands on something they could eat? I saw recently that Exxon had a damage awarded against it of $5.5 billion for the Valdez spill. Of course, there is no price on the Valdez spill, the worst spill of all time, at least as far as we know. And Exxon is fighting it, saying that it is not a just award. You know, regarding those of us who have fallen ill, wouldn't it be helpful for our illness to think about why are we ill and to work on, to become active, to tracing why we are ill? Would that not even help us to reconstitute ourselves instead of being passive and wondering what can be indoctrinated into us to make us better? Okay, we always become better when we work on our own and other people's behalves. Please help animals who are in such a sad situation in the laboratory with electrodes in them and electrodes in their cells and being forced to do tasks. I was at a meeting in which someone was describing monkeys that had electrodes implanted into their head, and they were pressing, doing choice experiment. They were pressing, and the experimenters were registering, and it's like a socket in your head. They were registering what the cells were doing while the monkeys pressed. And they jokingly referred to the poor monkeys as volunteering for the experiment. Then the animals in the wild that are stressed, that have no room, that are hunted in places that are really too small and against odds that were never meant for nature indeed. And then the animals that are in homes where they're either abused or they're not capable of staying too unlonely during long lapses or being put in kennels. So many problems for the poor animals and all the animals in the shelter. People, please try to get your animals from shelters and not brand new pets. Please try to not buy pets at pet stores. Get your pets from the shelter, if at all. Let's try to get rid of having to have shelters for pets and spay your pets so we don't have too many that nobody wants. Now I've got to say this. Too, that there is a satisfaction. Unfortunately, dig deep inside your psyche and your soul. Look inside yourself. Every one of us, we are not perfect. We are not all good. And there is in us an element that loves humiliation, that loves to see another being get its so-called just desert. Not for justice, but we love to see another creature get it. There's something in us that gets a satisfaction from that. People, recognize this, that we're humiliating life. We're humiliating life. And that is almost the worst degradation. That life that just looks up at you, simple and pure, knows no better than to live, gets humiliated into bastardization. I would say, for the animals, let's tell it. Let's go tell it to the colleges over the way and everywhere. Go tell it to the colleges to let the animals go. Go tell it to the colleges over the way at MIT. Go tell it to the colleges to let the animals go. See that kitten over there, let that kitten go. See that kitten has no hair, let that kitten go. See that kitten tremble and swell. That kitten would be better off in hell. Go tell it to the colleges to let the kittens go. Go tell it to the businesses, Gillette and Dow and 333. Go tell it to the businesses, research endeavors everywhere. Go tell it to the businesses to leave the animals alone. See those rodents shocked and ulcerated, let those rodents be. Humans making rodents suffer torture unabated, let those rodents alone. See those rodents wither and thrown, people it's life, leave it alone. Go tell it to the businesses, the pharmaceuticals and the medical research companies to let the rodents be. See this doctor over there? Let this doctor know. The brain to volunteer is the one inside his skull. Let this doctor know. Inform this doctor he can donate his parts as he volunteers so science gets its smarts. Go tell it to the doctors. They own not what they do. Go tell it to the Pentagon, over D.C. and everywhere. Go tell it to the cruelest race of all to let the animals go. See that monkey over there? Let that monkey go. See that monkey strapped to a chair? Let that monkey go. If I did that to a monkey in my house, I'd be prosecuted for the sick abuse. Go tell it to the colleges to let those monkeys go. The monkey terror and freezes. The monkey has a rightful place only in trees. Go tell it to the colleges, Harvard, BU, and MIT, to let the animals be. We have a question. Jasmine, wouldn't you like to see the elephants continue to live in Africa and India?
Yes.
Wouldn't it be wonderful? And we could just let them be, and the babies could be with their mothers, and they could walk all together.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. People, thank you so much for calling. This is from Stephanie on Beacon Hill. Remember, our number is 742-3333. And you're asking very important questions, and questions that require so much. It's not that they're not possible to answer, but they are so broad. And I will tell you what the question is. The question is, Stephanie asks, what do you think is the basis of jealousy in people? First of all, I think that to a degree, there may be in us a certain innate amount of competitive edge and an innate psychological and biological amount of noticing from early on if what, not so much if what we have is different from, more desirable than, etc., what someone else may or may not have on any particular dimension, but whether it gets treated that way. And we have a competitive edge. And, well, of course, if it's a matter of it's getting treated that way, then that's a matter of conditioning over time, that your experience leads you to be desirous of what you may feel. It may be only a feeling that you don't have, or for some reason you may dislike in someone else and thereby be jealous of it. But there may also be just an innate disposition for people to kind of, I said on a previous program, one thing about human beings, unlike some other species, we are very gregarious. We are constantly behaving, thinking, doing in relation to each other, even if we are alone and isolated. We're only isolated because we're alone as opposed to with a lot of people or other people. So being gregarious and being prone to reference ourselves to each other, we tend to probably have a disposition to measure ourselves against other people, being referentially prone to assess ourselves, and also, to a degree, seeing either truly or perceptually for a very complicated number of reasons that would have to be looked at according to the individual case, seeing that something we feel we don't have, rightfully or wrongly, is had somewhere else and is in a position that we believe we would prefer if we had it. So that could be some answer of why people are jealous. It's one of our most unfortunate emotions, and maybe somebody could call who would say they don't have any jealousy, but I think if you really search yourself, you'd be hard-pressed to find that you don't have some jealousy somewhere, that you won't meet up with a circumstance where you could become jealous. So I think it's in there, and I think it's a matter of how we treat each other and, you know, make it an experience. For example, the way we treat so much how certain females look and are glamorized. I mean, I don't necessarily object to it, but when all the cameras run to that and only care about it and they're sort of hog wild for it and can't get enough for it, it may be a kind of experience. And then on the other hand, the media tells you that it's very important to have cameras running after you. And so it's a series of multiple kinds of conditionings that get layered over and twisted around each other that can result in the final phenomenon. Some of our jealousies, too, may come from complexes we have about, for example, we may be jealous that we're not male. We may be jealous that we're not female. We may be jealous that we're not rich, obviously for rich, because we see what we think are perceived benefits that we don't have. As Mae West said, I've been rich and I've been poor, rich is better. Okay, so we tend to believe, you know, the story of someone who is rich but lonely, poor little rich boy, like the comic book. We just disregard that pretty much. I think the bigger picture that we employ is we'd rather be rich, and it can lead to some. You know, a lot of the conventions we have in society, I mentioned Freud on 1 or 2 shows, and I got some feedback that people noticed that and were interested, and some of the, excuse me, I was just interrupted for 1 minute here. Some of the, I'm trying to remember what my train of thought was. Some of the reasons that we, I believe it was, some of the reasons that we may be jealous may come from some early complexes of wanting to do away with people and things. I remember what I was talking about. Yeah, I was talking about a lot of the conventions and molds that we have to fit into, even if we don't have what's been called a traditional family life, are in place. Authorities, rules, laws, conventions we have, even though so many of those conventions have broken down. It's these things that prevent us from acting on our jealousies, acting to, and today we see that people are going right ahead more and more with the breakdown of culture, with the breakdown of close-knit groups, with the breakdown of relating to each other and talking to each other and having people who are close to you, close by in a consistent way all the time. This stuff is breaking down, but Freud explained how so many of the socialization or social laws, rules, regulations, etc., family practices and ways of it coming and being, or group practices, afford a buffer against people just going out and acting on wanting to do harm to others on the basis of jealousies from competitions and childhood inner kinds of dynamics that not only they may go through as a matter of their personal experience, but that they may go through as a matter of just a psychological experience of developing under a certain kind of circumstance, that maturationally it's going to come to pass that they will go through certain stages of different kinds of complexes and have to learn how to subdue and contend with behaviors they have that are more primal, that are more uninhibited. And Lord knows we have quite possibly, especially as violence goes, far too much disinhibition today. And one of my beliefs is, I will repeat, that the less we are in reference to each other, the more we will disinhibit without this sort of pressure, if you will, and also the less the more people can become deviant. The pressures of having a kind of way that surrounds us and a relation and a reference against each other is useful to keep our thinking for all of us in line with the group. And when we are not part of that, we can become much more deviant in our thinking than we otherwise might be without the feedback and constant frame of reference. We have another question coming. Jasmine, could you tell us who's on your shirt? Let's show the people what your shirt is.
Grumpy. I think this is Sleepy.
And who are they anyway, Grumpy and Sleepy?
They're from the movie Snow White.
Oh, Snow White. So they're two of the 7 dwarfs.
Yeah.
Yes. And you were telling me before, you always dress so nicely, and your mother dresses so nicely, and you look so lovely. And I asked you about choosing clothes for school and so on, but what did you tell me about school? You can look at the camera.
We have uniforms.
Right here. Tell them.
We have uniforms.
Do you think having uniforms is a good idea in the classroom?
Yes.
Why?
Well, because when it's tomorrow, you see, like, you don't have to figure out what you're going to wear tomorrow.
So it gets rid of one of the big hassles. And I bet you probably wouldn't know this, but I bet you that it also helps that maybe everybody's not worried about what they might have to wear, you know, or if they have a new outfit all the time. That takes a lot of pressure off, right?
Yeah.
I think there's too much attention to clothes for people when they're trying to just learn things. And you said, what's your favorite subject to learn?
Reading at the reading group.
Reading at the reading group. Bravo. Okay, thank you very much, Jasmine.
You're welcome.
Here we have a question from Tim in Back Bay. Thank you, Tim, for calling. And Tim asks, do you think it would be helpful if adults thought and acted like children? That's kind of a cute question. And if you mean they're acting like children in as much as being innocent, carefree, trusting, I wouldn't advise anyone to go out and try to be that way right now, just off the cuff. But in the ideal sense, if you mean that, playful, experiencing reality as something new and people, our poor children in daycare and so on, who don't get to just experience life by roaming around and checking things out in their natural state on a consistent basis and experience many kind of things. When they're allowed to do that, snow, it was so sad. One day, a few days ago in Boston, we had a little bit of snow, and a 2-year-old child with its mother, who had to hurry to bring it on its way to wherever, stopped and was picking up the snow and just imagining. That's so important, to pick up the snow and imagine the snow and step in the snow. And then you see children step in the water. They see how it splashes. If this is what you mean, being like children, experiencing life for the first time, experiencing the wonder and awe, and children who have not been turned against animals, how they respond to animals, their jaws drop. They are in awe of animals on a fresh basis. They dance unless they've been prescribed. Any kind of rhythm will make a very small child who's not already kind of constricted to not do that, move in response to rhythm that they hear. So if this is what you mean to be like children. On the other hand, if you mean to be like children in the sense that we all are, even as adults, in the sense that we still fight without regard to the other person, pick and grab at whatever we want, let our jealousies run rampant without restriction, take our own form of temper tantrum in so many so-called adult ways, expect to be the only one that we have to be concerned about. If that's what you mean, well, we wouldn't want that, you know, because that's another part of being a child. And that's why we have to be tolerant with our children and give them a break. And don't expect that they should know better, and don't try to train them and control them long distance. be with them arm in arm, hand in hand, so they won't be making the so-called mistakes, which are not mistakes, for they know not better, that you'll have to, by long distance, constantly be saying, come here, why are you doing this? Constantly be correcting them. I was going to touch upon a little follow-up of something we were talking about last week, which is that Washington, D.C. is currently quite concentrated, in part, at looking at the CPI to reduce it, which is going to impact, ultimately, the amount of wages that you will receive in negotiations for them, the amount of Social Security you will receive, the amount of benefits you will receive from the government, the amount of taxes you may have to pay, and of course it will give the Treasury more money because they won't have to spend it, and also they'll get more money because your taxes could become higher. And I want you to please try to think on this and many of the other things we talk about and anything else. Look around, observe, think about it, so that you won't be in a position of shaking your fist and thinking what a rotten deal life is or how you're being cheated, but be aware that this is transpiring. Call your Congress people, tell them you absolutely don't want it to happen. We can't go into a big dialogue about this today, but you know very well that the cost of living is not even stable. It always costs more to buy things with the same dollar. And it certainly costs more for those of us on limited incomes. So this is very important, among many other things, for you to be paying attention to. It directly affects your life, and you shouldn't just be at the long end of something at a distance, sort of getting it as it happens to you, and then be in a position of anger about it. Learn, think, it's all available, watch the news, read newspapers, you know, try to get good news sources, the better news sources which come in on cable and so on. You know, try to get yourself involved. And as you go around, think about things and watch them so that when you hear stuff, you can have an opinion, tentative at best. Of course, all of our opinions have to be tentative, where you can say with some measure of knowledge or awareness whether what you're being told or what is about to happen is good for you or bad for you, makes sense or doesn't make sense. And I told you last week this whole idea of reducing the CPI, because we say that inflation is no longer with us and that in fact we overstate what our inflation is best represented by the phrase, the snark was a bojum. In other words, being handed something that isn't all that accurate. Granted, many economists would disagree, but please become involved and think, learn, be aware, and let's have some fun too. Even the person who is the First Lady of our country mentioned, I saw, during the convention periods, asked the people if they had had fun when they were setting up. It was an off-camera kind of minute. And they said yes, and she said good, because this country does not have enough fun. Now, I know some people may despise her, some people may feel neutral, but yet there may be some value in that statement. Our country does not have enough fun, and our country does not have enough love, and our country does not have enough brotherhood, and it does not talk to each other. It does not admit each other and accept each other and learn to live with each other. Now, as we are coming towards the latter part of our show, I'd like to thank the crew, and the crew is so wonderful, and it gives me, and I hope them, a good feeling to have them here. They showed up so beautifully. They have to work all day, and then they come here and they're willing to work, and it takes a lot of work for us to bring this show to you. There are at least 9, 10, 12 of us here trying to bring this show to you. And we do it as a labor of love. Secondly, I want to thank the people who call and remind them that our next show will be 2 weeks from today on Thursday, again at 7 p.m. for you to call in. And very few persons have answered so far or dared to attack the question, what am I living for? I dare say that perhaps we're becoming too automatic. We're kind of robotic and automatic. We're nowhere near thinking about questions like that. First, we'd have to have the time, Second, we'd have to have the inclination, and our lives are too pressed with so much else. But that's where you can get some meaning in your life. Stop, slow down, examine. Examine your lifestyle. Examine ways of doing things better. Examine the option of doing business at home. I know many of you will say, well, how can I do that? More and more people are doing it. Examine options that change the structure of how you are living your life if you are not satisfied with it and it is causing you frustration. And just remember, a lesson I have had to learn as well as anybody and keep on learning, that nothing is gotten except by working very hard. That's the unfortunate thing. No kudos and comforts just come your way, believe it or not, even when people work at making it look that way. And certainly television teaches you that it is that way, but it is not, particularly for the people that are shown in that kind of position. So everything is gotten only by working arduously, and you can never let go. Life is just life is a struggle. Life is suffering. Hopefully life can be some joy. And hopefully, to not have missed the boat, life can be relationship with your fellow human beings. And life can be a day when we witness and we experience slightly more justice for all of us. Go outside. I always try to say this. Today was a beautiful day as it happens. We're filming this in the springtime in the year of 1997. And if you can't be going outside, try to arrange, and I know for many of you this won't be possible, try to arrange that you would have a window, some way to know how the outside is, or get out during the day for a break, and go outside even when the weather isn't so nice. That's why you let yourself in for such sad disappointment and naivete when things are falling apart and you don't know what to do. You don't know when the bad weather will end. So be aware of that. Please work to keep the animals out of the laboratory. Please. The animals in the laboratory undergoing what they're going when all they want to do is feel dirt under their feet and a tree under their foot. Please, they're in virtual concentration camps to the degree that many of them are having things done to them and incarcerated that they would no way permit, were it their choice, to be near or have to undergo. And yet they have to endure these kinds of things, be given cancer, be given AIDS, be given rectal and ocular and ear, auricle, all kinds of invasions into their bodies and psychological experiments and so on. I wrote a letter to NASA recently asking about a research center where they are possibly preparing monkeys to go into space, and asked them, please, don't do that. They wrote back at least thanking me. I felt, not just in general, but specifically to the letter, thanking me for realizing that I cared about it greatly to have written the kind of letter. It at least made an impact that they knew, they acknowledged somebody at least really cared. They did not agree, and they cited all the ethical standards they are prone to go by, but yet they admitted that I would have had to have cared very much to write such a letter. So please, it's the concentration camps. And it's also somewhat like the jails, which we're not going to speak about. So many people are in jail under terrible circumstances. I know we have a somewhat of a myth in some circumstances, not all, that jails are like vacation clubs, but so many people are in jail and they're in for unduly long times with no hope and no optimism when you weigh it and balance it against all things considered. This in no way speaks in favor of persons who do very bad things, as I hear cases of being out of jail in a few years, not so much to punish them, but what about secluding them once they do such harmful things? What about just making sure they don't get back into society? But all the other people that are in jails who really, to a degree, are in there unduly, harshly under circumstances, there's a lot of that as well. And we wouldn't know it unless we experienced it. And we wouldn't know what it would be to be at the hands of a jailer, potentially, or anyone, unless we had to go through it ourselves and all the other people. Also remember to be a model to our children. we can't be responsible for, we can't say we're responsible well enough for how they turn out should they become very vicious and hateful if we haven't been loving, understanding models from way back when. Once the problem has gone very far, there's a very difficult time to bring it back to a point where it should be. We did have another question, but I have to put that question aside this evening as we're beginning to wind down. And I leave you. Please give us your questions. I would like to look at them anyway. So please continue to call as we leave the show. And I would like to leave you on this note, please. No more coercion. No more revenge. No more coercion. No more revenge. This is the message. It's very simple. It's very simple but hard to achieve. It's a discipline of which we aren't aware. We are a people that always in a snare. We're at each other's throats. We get each other's throats. We get each other's goat. But the first thing to correct is the way that we are towards each other, and the way that we take offenses to ourselves so personally, and the way that we feel that it's happening to us, and the way that we feel that it's happening to us. No more coercion. No more revenge. Jasmine, would you please come up here? Jasmine, come here. Stand for the camera, please. Let us say good night to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Say good night. It's us cosmic powwow, cosmic powwow, cosmic powwow, cosmic powwow.